Chapter 1. The Eternal Rose of House Velmyra. The sun had long set beyond the jagged hills of the border princes, where the land slumbered beneath a veil of mist and menace. A pale moon hovered above like a watchful eye, casting silver light over the sprawling Velmyra estate, an opulent relic of stone and thorn that crowned the cliffs like a haunted jewel. Ivy strangled its towers, and gargoyles sneered eternally from parapets cracked by time and secrecy. The villagers of the nearby hamlet of Dreckford whispered her name only behind locked doors, and under breath thick with wine and fear. Lady Seraphina Velmyra. The name dripped from the tongue like honey touched by hemlock. For over 90 years the matriarch of House Velmyra had ruled her lands with grace, mystery, and chilling poise. Her family, once a minor offshoot of a forgotten line, had risen inexplicably in wealth and prestige over the decades. The other nobles, aged, shriveled, died, but Seraphina remained untouched by time. Not unchanged. Unchanged would be mortal. Seraphina was perfected. Each year at the spring equinox, she would host a gala of unfathomable splendor. Gowns spun from spider silk, viols and harpsichords echoing down candle-lit halls, and platters of roasted peacocks served with rose-syruped wine. Her guests, drawn from as far as Tabaro and Remus, came not just to feast, but to glimpse her. Lady Seraphia, whose skin shimmered like frost-laced alabaster, whose raven-black hair flowed like oil down her back, and whose eyes, oh, those eyes, shone a deep garnet, as though wine and fire had been stirred into her irises. She moved like smoke, spoke like a lullaby, and smiled like a blade pressed gently to the throat. This night, the grand hall of Velmyra Keep pulsed with low, luxurious music, velvet banners embroidered with thorned roses draped from the rafters. At the head of the great table she sat, Seraphina, the Eternal Rose, garbed in a gown of midnight and onyx. The bodice clung like sin, and the sleeves billowed like wings. Her fingers, adorned in antique rings carved with runes of unknown make, toyed idly with a goblet of deep red wine. Or was it wine? Such wonderful company, she purred, voice as soft as the brush of a moth's wing. But I do so miss proper conversation. Across the table sat Lord Roderick Halvar, a minor noble from the eastern hill forts, sweating through his silks. He had come seeking trade, and perhaps, in his deluded ambition, her hand. He swallowed hard, unable to meet her gaze. Seraphina's smile widened slightly. Her teeth were perfectly white, perfectly even, yet something about them felt wrong, too precise, predatory. The candlelight flickered, shadows danced. A gust swept through the hall, though no window had opened. The musicians paused. A scent filled the room, not of flowers or incense, but of iron. Something had changed. "My lady," Roderick began, his voice trembling like a string under too much tension. A scream, sharp and sudden. Everyone turned. One of the serving maids had collapsed, her body twitching violently upon the marble floor. Blood bubbled from her lips. Her skin turned gray, then papery white. Her eyes burst like grapes with a wet pop. Her convulsions ceased, and silence devoured the hall. Seraphina stood, slowly, regally. She did not scream. She did not panic. She did not show even a flicker of surprise. She simply turned her head toward the lifeless girl and exhaled, her lips parting slightly in what could only be described as mild disappointment. "How careless," she said coldly. She drank from the wrong decanter. One of the guests retched. "Escort the rest of the staff out," Seraphina ordered her steward. He bowed low, not meeting her eyes. His neck bore faint scars, as though someone had gripped it hard and long ago. Lady Seraphina stepped around the table and knelt by the corpse, her gown pooling like dark water. She stroked the girl's cheek with a finger, so tenderly. Then she whispered something. No one heard it, but a few saw the girl's lips twitch. Just once. And then Seraphina stood and turned back to her guests. Her smile returned, painted anew. Well then, shall we continue? Chapter 2. Whispers Beneath the Moonlight. The full moon hung bloated above the towers of Velmyra Keep, casting a spectral glow across its rain-slick stones. The old fortress crouched in silence atop its crag like a patient predator, its long hallways sighing under the weight of forgotten things. Beneath its vaulted ceilings, amidst the chill of torches that flickered nervously in iron sconces, the whispers began. Not from nobles, from the ones who swept the ash from the hearths, who scrubbed the red stains from the stone floors, who knew which door creaked, which hall echoed too long, which paintings bled oil that never dried. The servants. "She doesn't eat," muttered Yelka, an old scullery maid with milky eyes and hands bent like the roots of ancient trees. She stood hunched by the kitchen fire, gnawing on the edge of a raw turnip, eyes fixed on the corridor. "Not a crumb, not even a fig," she hissed. "Only watches, watches like a spider on a silver web." Garrick, a half-wit stable boy missing 2 fingers, nodded dumbly. "Seen her once," he slurred. "Eyes red like butcher's glass. Thought I seen wrong, but she looked at me. Felt like drownin'." In the servants' quarters below the east wing, tales spun thicker than the cobwebs in the wine cellars. They spoke of nobles who came to court Lady Seraphina only to vanish after a single night, rooms emptied, horses still in the stables, letters sent to families never answered. Others whispered of the locked room in the southern wing, the one none had cleaned in decades. Of how once a footman broke in on a dare, and the next morning his entrails were discovered, neatly arranged in the chapel, as if placed with reverence. "Sometimes," Yelka muttered, "when you pass her door at night you hear weeping. Not hers, there." It was into this maelstrom of fear and rumor that the new steward arrived. Andrei Valchek, a stern man with sharp eyes and sharper ears. Formerly of the court of Prince Garain, he'd come recommended, but with his own past left conveniently vague. He was taller than most, lean and fox-faced, his boots polished even after days on the road. He watched, listened, and unlike the others, he remembered what he heard. Andrei dismissed most of it as peasant gossip at first. Noble houses always attracted superstition, and he'd worked under a necromancer's cousin once. Nothing shocked him. But there was something about Velmyra Keep that clung. The walls bled moisture that smelled faintly of iron. The cats refused to cross the grand hall. Mirrors cracked without cause. At night, the wind moaned, not with a whistle, but with something disturbingly close to words. On his 3rd evening, Andrei stood alone in the lantern-lit corridor leading from the kitchens to the library, double-checking the estate's aging ledger. Something scraped behind the door to the wine cellar. He paused. Another scrape. Too deliberate. He opened the door. Slowly, the lantern trembled in his grip. Cold stone steps descended into darkness. He called out. No answer. Andrei descended. The temperature dropped with each step, breath fogging in the air. At the base, the wine racks stood like skeletal sentinels. Something darted between the shelves. He turned, raised the light, and saw a girl. Pale, naked, eyes black with terror, hands tied behind her back with silk cord. She opened her mouth to scream, but something yanked her backward into the shadows, fast, too fast. The only sound was a wet crunch, then a slurp, then silence. Andrei did not breathe for a full minute. Then, clutching the lantern, he fled back upstairs, slammed the door, bolted it shut, and leaned against it, chest heaving. When he reported the incident to the night captain, the man only looked at him blankly and said, "There is no wine cellar beneath the eastern wing, sir." Andrei, sweating and shaking, followed him back to the hallway. The door was gone. Only a solid wall remained, smooth stone, undisturbed. But in the morning, André checked the ledger again. Entry 443. A lady from Maragliano. Arrival confirmed. No record of departure. Entry 444. Storage updated. Vainsweet vintage, bottled fresh. He did not sleep that night. He began to believe, and he began to watch her. Chapter 3. The Mask of Blossoms. The full bloom of spring brought with it the annual Mask of Blossoms, a grand affair thrown beneath the crystal chandeliers of Velmyra Keep, a celebration of rebirth, beauty, and the illusion of innocence. But innocence had long since died in this place. The great ballroom had been transformed into a garden of whispered decadence. Thousands of roses, lilies, and blood-hued orchids bloomed unnaturally vibrant across trellises, pillars, and the ceiling itself. The air was thick with a cloying perfume that seemed to cling to the tongue and nestle in the lungs. Beneath that scent was something else, something faint, coppery, like old blood masked with jasmine. Silk-draped courtiers danced to the haunting strains of harp and viol, faces hidden behind intricate masks of bone, silver, and painted wood. Candlelight flickered across ivory tiles, reflecting in pools of red wine, laughter, and veiled menace. At the height of the evening, a hush fell upon the room. She entered. Lady Seraphina Velmyra, eternal hostess, glided down the grand staircase without taking a single visible breath. Her gown shimmered like moonlight caught in obsidian, threaded with delicate filigree roses of gold that climbed from her waist to her shoulders. Her mask, a slender, elegant creation shaped like a death's head moth, covered only her eyes, letting the guests drink in the impossible smoothness of her skin, the unlined perfection of her face. She looked 25 at most. No lines, no sag of age, no wear of time, just beauty, perfect and terrible. Among the sea of guests, one visitor stood frozen. Lady Aurelia Venest, a high noblewoman from far-off Magritta, whispered in disbelief to her cousin. "She can't be. That's her? My mother said Seraphina was her rival 60 years ago." "She doesn't age," came the quiet reply. "Some say she was born of the gods, others say she's the devil's bride." Aurelia's expression twisted, not with fear, with envy. She crossed the floor toward Seraphina, fan fluttering in her gloved hand, smile like a dagger behind her rose-petal mask. "My Lady Velmyra," Aurelia cooed, bowing low, "you outshine the moon." Seraphina turned toward her, her garnet eyes gleamed. "Aurelia Venest," she said softly, with a voice that caressed the ear like silk soaked in sin. "You wear your grandmother's perfume." Aurelia froze. "My grandmother?" "Ah, yes," Seraphina smiled. "She wore it the night she last danced with me. Here." Aurelia blinked. Her fan stopped. Beneath her mask, the blood drained from her face. Before she could respond, the musicians resumed. Seraphina turned and offered her hand to a masked suitor, André, though few recognized him beneath the black wolf's face. His steps were stiff, unsure. They danced. Around them, the court turned. The petals of enchanted roses fell from the ceiling like snow, and yet none landed on Seraphina. Above, hidden in the shadows of the balcony, a figure watched. Clad in rust-red robes, eyes veiled behind a strange bronze visor etched with runes, the stranger stood perfectly still. He did not drink. He did not speak. He observed, unmoving. His gaze locked not on the dancers, but on Seraphina alone. Aurelia noticed him. Her curiosity, already piqued by Seraphina's disturbing youth, drew her toward the stairs. She ascended slowly, unnoticed amidst the crowd. She approached the figure, her heels clicking on the marble. "You don't dance?" she asked, her voice laced with flirtation. The figure turned, His mouth was hidden behind a mask of ancient design, Lahmian script etched in flaking gold. His voice was low, wrong, layered with something inhuman. "I have come to witness." "Witness what?" she asked. "The beginning of her end." A chill crept down Aurelia's spine. She backed away slowly, intending to return to the ballroom. But the moment she turned her back, she felt something punch through her abdomen. A sharp, icy hot pain erupted through her belly. She gasped, looked down. A dagger, bone-handled, buried to the hilt through her silk bodice, sliding through organ and sinew like slicing fruit. Her scream never came. The figure stepped back and let her body collapse onto the cold marble. Her blood flowed like a winding ribbon, painting roses onto the white stone. Below, the music played on, and Seraphina, dancing with Andre, paused mid-step. Her smile faltered. She turned her head toward the balcony. Her eyes narrowed. Andre followed her gaze but saw only shadows. Something had changed, and the petals falling from the ceiling had begun to wilt. Chapter 4. Threads of Blood and Silk. The fire in the library's hearth crackled, casting dancing shadows across rows of ancient tomes and scrolls that smelled of dust and forgotten things. The chamber, nestled deep in the heart of Velmyra Keep, was a cavernous monument to knowledge both sacred and profane. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned with leather-bound grimoires, histories long out of print, and maps of realms that no longer bore names. Steward Andrei Valchek moved through the chamber like a wraith, gloved fingers trailing across the spines of volumes that hadn't seen light in centuries. His lantern, low and flickering, painted golden halos on surfaces that had never deserved sanctity. He had waited until the hour of deepest night. The guests had retired. The servants were locked behind bolted dormitory doors. Even the rats dared not stir at this hour. He was alone, or so he hoped. Driven by what he had seen, what he refused to believe he'd seen, Andre had begun hunting for answers in the one place where truth and lies tangled in brittle parchment and faded ink. He pulled free an unassuming book from a shelf of courtly genealogies. It resisted, then released with a low rasp, revealing behind it a hollow, black as sin, and twice as cold. His heart thudded. Inside, hidden beneath a thin layer of dust and web, lay a stack of books bound not in leather but in something more, organic. Skin, perhaps. Stitched and marked with symbols that squirmed beneath his gaze. He lifted the top tome. The title, in high Gothic and crimson ink, Lahmian, the Crimson Thirst and its Daughters. His breath caught. The name felt like a curse in his mind. He'd heard it before, barely whispered in temples, scrawled in the margins of purged texts. Lahmian, the first city of vampires, where beauty had been worshipped like a god, and blood spilled like wine. He opened the book, and the ink shimmered. Pages filled with rituals, diagrams of opened veins, of transformation rites soaked in agony, portraits of queens with eyes that held stars and fangs that glistened with ruin. He flipped through page after page, horror tightening around his throat. One page bore a painted likeness, a woman, impossibly beautiful, crowned in obsidian roses, her eyes twin rubies, her mouth slightly parted over elongated canines. Seraphina. He staggered back, bile rising. He dropped the tome, but it did not fall. It clung to his hands, as though bound to him now. Tearing it free, he turned to another book. This one was darker, heavier. Blood's Covenant, the art of binding flesh to will. Its pages were worse. Descriptions of mortals being drained, flayed, remade. Rituals involving infants, desecrated icons, and the blood of the innocent taken under a moonless sky. And worse, personal notations scrawled in the margins in an elegant hand, her hand. The noblewoman from Brionne lacked spirit, but the marrow was rich, fed the sisters threefold. To weep before drinking, such weakness must be crushed. Emotion clouds the harvest. And Raisho's promise, he is seen yet returns. I will test him soon. His blood froze. His name, written weeks ago. He shut the book with a snap, heart pounding like a war drum. Behind him, something moved. The shadows shifted, not from the firelight, but from something within the dark. He spun, lantern raised, its glow casting the far corner of the room into sharp relief. A curtain stirred. André crept forward, slowly drawing the dagger he kept hidden in his boot. With a swift motion, he tore the curtain aside. Nothing. Just stone. But something had been there. He could feel it, like a lingering scent of rot behind perfume. He turned back to the table, to the tomes. The top book was now open again. A fresh page bled ink, forming words even as he watched, wide-eyed. You seek truth, steward. But truth has a price. Blood dripped from the page. No, not ink. His own blood. He looked down. His hand, the one that touched the book, had been pierced. Thin, needled cuts like spider fangs had opened his flesh. The tome pulsed with hunger. He snatched a cloth from the desk, wrapped his hand, and shoved the books back into the hollow behind the shelf, sealing them away. As he did, he noticed a final message carved faintly into the wood within. Even shadows thirst. He fled the library, heart hammering, hands shaking. But as he left, he didn't see the woman in the red gown standing atop the spiral staircase, watching with eyes like garnets and a smile that never reached her lips. Lady Seraphina Velmyra had always known someone would find the books, and she had always known it would be him. Chapter 5. The Eyes of the Morning Saint. The wind howled as the rider approached Velmyra Keep, his cloak snapping like a torn sail, hooves clapping against the stony path. Clouds hung low and heavy, smothering the sun, casting the estate in a perpetual pallor. No bird sang, no animal stirred. The forest around the grounds seemed to hold its breath. The man's name was Father Elend Morbrecht, a priest of Mor, the god of death and dreams. His face was gaunt, framed by gray curls and a beard that looked carved from marble. His eyes were heavy-lidded, pale, and utterly still, eyes that had seen too many tombs, too many deathbeds, too many unnatural things slithering through the veil between life and what came after. He had not come for tea or courtesy. He had come because the veil around Velmyra thinned. It had begun with omens. Ravens found gutted in neat circles outside the shrine to Mor in the nearby hamlet. Graves that would not stay sealed. A child born without eyes who whispered Seraphina's name in a dead woman's voice. The villagers had begged for him to investigate, and Mor's dreams had shown him a rose blooming from a mouthless skull. When Father Elend entered the grand hall of Velmyra Keep, he did so with slow, measured steps, his obsidian rosary clinking against the haft of his silver-edged staff. His robes were black as voided ink, stitched with bone-white threads in the shape of the morning saint, a veiled figure whose empty sockets wept eternally. Lady Seraphina met him at the top of the sweeping stairs. She descended with the grace of falling snow, her gown of violet and deep red trailing behind her like spilled wine. "Father Morbrecht," she said, with a voice that should have belonged to a lover, not a lady. "It is rare to see one of Mor's flock so far from shadowed crypts. What brings you to my home?" Elend inclined his head, but did not kneel. He never knelt for the living. "My Lady Velmyra," he said, voice dry as parchment, "there is a rot in the soil here. The dead do not sleep. Mor's winds twist unnaturally around your lands. I am here to investigate, and to sanctify if needed." Her smile did not falter, but something in her eyes tightened. What a grim diagnosis for such a beautiful spring. Perhaps it is simply the air. The border princes are known for their storms. Elend walked past her without asking leave. She followed, like silk on tile. He moved through the halls with deliberate precision, pausing, listening. He paused beside a tapestry, a glorious depiction of Seraphina's supposed ancestor slaying a beast with a silver lance. Curious, he murmured. This hero died childless and was buried in Mirigliano. This tapestry lies. Seraphina said nothing. In the chapel he lit a candle and whispered a hymn to Moore. The flame flickered violently, then bent away from the altar. He sprinkled sanctified ash on the stones. The ash crawled upward, recoiling, as if the very ground spat it out. In the crypts below the keep he opened a sealed tomb. The corpse inside was missing its eyes and tongue, yet bore no sign of decay. Its mouth was twisted in a final scream, as if buried alive or awakened too late. "Blasphemy," he whispered, and began to pray. He did not see the shape behind him at first, but he felt it. The cold, the absence, the softest drag of something inhuman across the stone. He turned sharply, raising his staff, and there was Seraphina, her face calm, expression composed. "Father Morbrecht," she said gently, "you have wandered far beyond courtesy. Your house is cursed," he said. "The dead weep beneath it. Their dreams are twisted. Moore's eye is upon you." She stepped closer. "They do not weep," she whispered. "They sing. To me." And then, faster than he could comprehend, she was upon him. Her hand gripped his throat, not tight, just enough to hold him still. Her other hand traced down his chest, fingers burning cold even through his robes. His staff fell. His lips moved, trying to utter a banishment, but her touch froze the words in his throat. And then she leaned in. Her breath against his cheek was warmer than blood. "You are brave, priest," she murmured, "but you walk a path I paved before your god was whispered in back alleys. Moore's realm ends at my gates." She released him. He stumbled back, gasping, but she made no move to kill. "Not yet. You will return to your temple," she said sweetly, "and you will tell them nothing, because if you speak, I will pull your soul from your mouth and make it weep in a box of glass for all eternity." Andrei watched from behind a pillar, eyes wide with terror. Elend said nothing. He turned and fled. At the gates, his horse was waiting, untouched. As he rode from Velmyra, the clouds broke and moonlight washed across the path. But he would never speak again. When the villagers found him days later at the steps of Moore's chapel, his tongue had been nailed to a statue, and his eyes had turned to stone. The mourning saint wept, but the dead in Velmyra did not. Chapter 6. Beneath the Crypt of Ancestors. The night was breathless, as if the wind itself dared not whisper across the grounds of Velmyra Keep. A pall hung over the estate like a burial shroud. The stars refused to shine, and the moon was choked behind a veil of ashen cloud. Even the trees around the crypt bent away from it, gnarled limbs twisted as though in retreat. Andrei Valchek moved like a shadow through the garden of statuary, his footsteps muffled on the moss-stained stones. Cloaked in black, a lantern clutched in one hand and a stolen iron key in the other, he approached the entrance to the family crypt, a Gothic archway beneath the weeping angel statue of Saint Viralia. The key turned with a dry groan, like a corpse sighing in its tomb. The iron gate creaked open. The smell that hit him was not just rot, but age, thick and primal, like the scent of bones forgotten in a place the gods had abandoned. He stepped inside. The stairs descended deeper than they should have. Dust clung to the walls like cobwebs spun from grave dust. The deeper he went, the more his breath steamed in the air, and his lantern flickered erratically as if struggling to remain alight. At the base of the stairs lay the Crypt of Ancestors, a vast subterranean vault, ringed by carved pillars wrapped in ivy motifs. Sarcophagi lined the walls, their lids sealed with waxen sigils, the stone faces of the dead carved in eternal repose. The names etched upon them were older than empire, older than Bretonia, Velmyras, who had never been recorded in any noble registry. André moved carefully, eyes scanning each coffin. He traced his gloved fingers over one sarcophagus lid. Lady Seraphina Velmyra, died 1012 IC, age 17. Too young. He moved to the next. Lord Marius Velmyra, died 1134 IC, age 16. Another. All the family through centuries, dying as children. A lie. The scratch of clawed stone echoed behind him. He spun. Nothing. He pressed deeper into the crypt. The corridor narrowed, slanting downward into a forgotten artery of the keep. The air grew wet. The stone here changed. Older, darker, carved with glyphs in a script that looked wrong to the eye. The walls pulsed with moisture, and something like breathing echoed faintly from beneath the floor. At the end of the passage lay a door of black iron, engraved with a spiral of thorns wrapped around a naked, blindfolded woman. Her mouth was sewn shut. He touched the handle. Cold as death. The door groaned open. Within lay a hidden chamber, ancient beyond reckoning. A blood-stained altar sat in its center, carved from a single block of obsidian, its surface slick and wet despite the absence of any recent use. Runnels along the edges had been shaped to guide flowing blood into a sunken basin at its base. The basin was filled not just with dried gore, but with bones, child-sized femurs, delicate ribs, skulls with teeth still growing in. Above the altar, a canopy of bones was suspended like a chandelier, strung together with sinew and silver wire. Candles sat in their empty eye sockets, still burning with a dull green flame. André's stomach churned. He stepped closer. Etched into the floor around the altar was a ritual circle, each symbol precise, layered in languages both magical and profane. He recognized glyphs from Lahmian blood rites, symbols of binding, enthrallment, eternal beauty through sacrifice. In the far wall, 7 sarcophagi stood upright, chained and sealed with golden locks. Each bore a female name. Each bore the Velmyra sigil. Their lids were carved not with the faces of the dead, but with mirrors, now cracked and darkened. André approached the nearest one. He raised his lantern. Behind the mirror, something moved. A face, beautiful and smiling, but wrong. Hollow eyes, lipless smile, skin stretched too tight across bone. The mirror warped and the face lunged toward the glass. He fell back, heart hammering. From the darkness came a soft, echoing sigh. A whisper, spoken by a dozen voices in unison. "Join us." He scrambled to his feet, backing toward the altar. Then his eyes caught the farthest corner of the room. There another figure lay. A corpse, dressed in priestly robes. The eyes gouged out, the tongue nailed to his open palm. Around his neck, the sigil of Moor, Father Elon Morbrecht. His mouth was twisted in terror, but something had been carved into his exposed chest, each letter deep and meticulous. "Silence is mercy." André turned and fled. As he passed the altar, the candles flared high, and the basin of blood boiled. He heard them laughing. High melodic voices, feminine, regal, insatiable. Behind him the iron door slammed shut, but even after it was closed, he could still hear the knocking. From inside the sarcophagi, relentless, waiting, hungry. Chapter 7. Seraphina's Secret. The halls of Velmyra Keep were silent, unnaturally so. No wind moaned through the stone passages, no footsteps echoed on the polished floors. It was as if the keep itself was holding its breath, listening. watching. Andrei Valchek moved with caution, each step placed like a predator stalking the edge of a trap. His hands were still stained with the blood from the crypts, despite his frantic scrubbing. The stink clung to his skin, iron and rot mixed with cold sweat. He had seen too much. He needed answers. And so, under the veil of moonless dark, he made his way to Seraphina's private wing, the one only she and her most trusted inner circle dared enter. The doors were engraved with velvet-wrapped wood and lined in gold-leaf roses. No locks barred his way, not tonight. They opened at his touch, as though inviting him in. The chamber beyond was vast, a cathedral of indulgence. Crimson silks hung from the high ceilings like veins turned to fabric, swaying in a wind that did not exist. The floor was black marble veined with scarlet. Incense coiled in the air, a scent too rich, too sweet, cloying. At its center stood a chase of coiled silver serpents, their eyes made of rubies, their fangs bared in ornamental fury. And upon it, draped like a goddess in repose, was Lady Seraphina Velmyra. She wore a gown of liquid shadow slit to the hip, exposing one pale thigh like a blade sheathed in silk. Her long raven hair spilled over her shoulders and across the chase, cascading like ink in water. Her eyes, no longer disguised by glamour, shone the color of deep garnets, glowing faintly in the low candlelight. She was no longer pretending to be mortal. "Andrei," she said softly, her voice a song of old blood and promises. "You've been very curious." He froze. The lantern trembled in his grip. "I saw you," she continued, rising slowly, barefoot on the cold marble, "in my crypt, among my sisters, standing over my altar like a thief with a guilty heart." He tried to speak, but the words turned to ash in his mouth. She walked toward him, silent as snowfall, no footsteps, no heartbeat. "I should tear your soul from your body," she whispered, circling him like a serpent coiling around prey. "Crack your bones open, drink the marrow, bind your screaming ghost to the walls of my chamber, forever howling." Andrei flinched, but she didn't strike. Instead, she stopped in front of him and touched his cheek with a hand cold enough to burn. "But you were brave," she said. "You didn't run." "I did run," he croaked. She smiled. "Not far enough." Then she pressed closer, so close he could smell her scent. Roses in bloom over fresh graves, honey smeared across raw meat. "It had many stewards," she murmured into his ear. "None lasted, most broke. You haven't. You're clever, strong, curious. You saw horrors, and you wanted more. That makes you different." "I wanted truth," he whispered. "You found it," she said, stepping back. "Now let me show you what it means to own it." With a gesture, the room changed. The silks pulled back, the shadows peeled away, and behind her was a mirror, tall and flawless. She stepped before it, and her reflection did not follow. Instead, the mirror revealed another Seraphina, her true form. Hair now blacker than void, her skin pale as alabaster carved from bone, eyes sunken and glowing like coals. Her mouth, split with hunger, revealed fangs, not dainty things of subtle grace, but long, predatory spears designed to rend and tear. Her nails were claws. Her beauty had not vanished, it had been revealed. Inhuman, ageless, perfectly monstrous. Andrei stared, horror-struck. "I was born in Lahmian before your gods were dust," she said. "I danced in the court of Queen Neferata. I drank the blood of princes. I watched empires burn and lovers rot to bone. And I have never aged a day." She turned from the mirror, the reflection remaining behind, watching. "I could erase you," she said. "Then why don't you?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. She stepped close again, and this time he did not recoil. "Because I see myself in you," she said. "Not as I am, as I was, mortal, hungry, afraid. She leaned in, her lips brushed his ear. I offer you power, Andre, knowledge, life beyond the reach of death, a throne of shadows, the ability to see the world for what it truly is, a banquet of blood, and the weak its wine. Andre trembled. You have seen my secret, she said, her eyes like twin stars dying in fire. Now choose. Her fingernail, razor sharp, drew a line across her own throat. A single drop of dark crimson blood welled up, rich and heavy with scent. It shimmered like wine, like rubies, like sin. She offered it to him on the tip of her finger. Andre stared, then opened his mouth, and tasted the dark. The chamber pulsed, the candles flared, the mirror cracked. Seraphina smiled, and the last light of Andre's old life died behind his eyes. Chapter 8. The Sisters in Shadow. The forest beyond Velmyra Keep was older than memory. Gnarled oaks reached skyward like skeletal arms frozen in prayer, their bark blistered and split with age. Moss carpeted the ground in thick green waves, muffling sound, swallowing footsteps. No animal called, no insects buzzed. Even the wind refused to speak here. At the heart of this forgotten glade, beneath the twisted boughs of a tree long dead but never fallen, a circle of standing stones rose like jagged fangs from the earth. Each stone was etched with runes worn smooth by centuries of blood and moonlight. At their center lay a stone basin, blackened with time and ringed in dried roses the color of dried scabs. The sky above was veiled in thick clouds, yet the glade glowed faintly, bathed in light from no discernible source. Lady Seraphina Velmyra stood at the center, motionless as a statue, her gown of deep indigo trailing like mist across the moss. Her eyes, inhuman in their focus, stared into the basin where blood, warm, viscous, and impossibly fresh, swirled in hypnotic eddies. Around her, the coven emerged one by one from the shadows. Each moved like a living specter, graceful, terrible, and deathless. There was Lady Nazaria, tall and thin as a willow, her skin stretched so tight it shimmered like porcelain. She wore a crown of woven hair, taken from 100 doomed lovers, and her eyes were blindfolded in red silk, for she saw through the blood of others. Next came Sister Varella, her voice a hiss and her mouth never closed, lips pulled back permanently in a rictus grin. She wore a gown of stitched tongues, still twitching faintly, and dragged with her a chain of finger bones like a rosary. The third was Elta Maria, youngest in appearance, with hair of spun silver and the serene face of a saint, until she smiled. Then her teeth were not merely fangs, but rows, curved like a shark's, layered deep and glistening with venom that never dried. The fourth arrived last, gliding noiselessly. Brelka of Nagashazar, once a priestess of a forgotten cult, her body gaunt and draped in the vestments of sacrilege. Her eyes had been replaced with black opals, and in the center of her chest was a carved socket, pulsing with an eldritch heart that was not her own. As one, they took their places around the altar. Seraphina lifted her hands, the blood in the basin stilled. Sisters. Their voices responded in chorus, layered and inharmonic. Matriarch, I have called you here because the veil thins. Eyes are turning toward us. The dream of Lahmian must evolve, or rot with time. Varel chuckled, her laughter wet and full of mucus. The priest of Mora learned our name. Andre bleeds into us now, but others will come, always more, gnawing at the edges. Nazaria tilted her head, the blindfold stained with old tears. Let them come. We will turn their bones into scripture. No, Seraphina said, we no longer hide in tombs and ballrooms. We are not mere predators, we are queens, and queens must conquer. Maria licked her lips, tongue black as tar. "What then, sister? A new court?" "New kingdom," Seraphina whispered. "We begin with the border princes, weak, squabbling lords, fearful serfs, easily bent, easily bled." The blood in the basin rippled violently, reacting to her words. "We plant our roots here," she continued. "A dynasty of blood and silk. No more hiding in mansions, no more petty masquerades. We become the ruling breath of this land." Brelka stepped forward, voice low and echoing. "The others will not agree. Neferata's will still hold sway in the east." Seraphina's eyes narrowed. "Neferata is a memory, an idol fading in her own vanity. She will not stop us." "None will." A silence followed. Then Nysaria raised her head. "And what of the steward? Will he kneel or break?" Seraphina's smile curved slowly, her lips red as arterial spray. "He drinks from me now. The first drops have taken hold. Soon he will crave nothing else. A blade wrapped in silk. I will wield him." The wind suddenly shifted. A distant howl echoed through the trees, deep, guttural, and wrong. Not wolf, not beast, something older, something called by blood. Mireia hissed. "The spirits grow restless." "Let them stir," Seraphina said. "Tonight we awaken the old covenants. The purge begins with smoke and silence. We burn the hamlet by dawn. Those who scream shall feed the soil." The sisters bowed. Then, without a word, they stepped back into the forest. One by one, dissolving into the dark, carried on winds that should not exist, moving with the grace of whispers and the hunger of centuries. Seraphina remained. She looked into the basin one last time. The blood formed a face. Andrea. His eyes were open, wide, half human, half hollow. She smiled at her reflection through him, and then the blood boiled. Chapter 9. The Blade and the Kiss. The moon was high when Andro awoke, gasping. His sheets were soaked with sweat, clinging to his body like a shroud. His dreams, if they were dreams, had been a cascade of nightmare and ecstasy. He saw himself drowning in a river of blood that tasted like spiced wine, dancing with women whose eyes bled, their mouths split wide with kisses sharp as daggers. He had felt their hands all over him, caressing, clawing, caressing again. He stumbled from his bed, half-naked and trembling, the wound on his wrist aching with a phantom throb. The place where Seraphina had fed him her blood now itched beneath the skin, like something moving beneath it, growing. The candle he lit flickered as if in warning. He didn't sleep again that night. 2 nights later, Seraphina summoned him. The hall was empty when he arrived, no guards, no servants, only silence and the long drag of his own footsteps across the velvet runner. Her door opened without sound. Inside, she stood before a mirror but cast no reflection. She wore no gown tonight, only thin, translucent silks that clung to her curves like mist on water. Her hair fell unbound, pooling like liquid night down her back. Her skin glowed faintly in the candlelight, luminescent. Perfect. Andre's breath caught in his throat. "You're afraid," she said without turning. "That's good. Fear keeps the soul tender." He swallowed, his voice hollow. "Why me?" "Because you've seen what others deny," she answered, finally turning. "You touched the altar, gazed into the crypt, and did not collapse. You dream, Andre, even now, when others would burn their eyes to forget. That makes you useful." "To what end?" Her smile came slowly, sensually, like a dagger unsheathing. "I will show you." She walked to him, every movement effortless, a panther wrapped in silk. In her hand appeared a blade, curved, thin, forged of blackened steel, etched with sigils that shimmered with heatless light. The air tightened. "This is an initiation blade," she whispered. "It does not wound flesh. It wounds the spirit." He didn't move. She circled him, then gently placed the flat of the blade against his chest. It was cold, then burning. Agony bloomed, not physical, but deeper. A ripping sensation inside his chest, like unseen hands reaching into his soul, clutching it, branding it. He screamed. His knees hit the floor. The sound that tore from his throat was not entirely human. Seraphina knelt before him, cradled his face. Her touch burned and soothed at once. "Pain is the gate," she whispered, "and you are standing on its threshold." Blood seeped from his eyes, his nose, his ears. His veins stood out against his skin, dark and pulsing with something thicker than blood. Seraphina leaned in, her tongue flicked across his cheek, tasting his suffering. Then she bit her own wrist. Her blood dripped slowly, ruby drops onto his lips. Andrei's mouth opened instinctively. He drank. Not much, a mouthful, no more. But it changed him. Every nerve caught fire. His heartbeat slowed, then thundered. His vision blurred, then sharpened beyond reason. He could see the candlelight in perfect clarity, could hear dust settling to the floor. He tasted the air, could feel it, alive with ancient secrets. He felt her blood moving in him, her hunger, her desire. He saw her not with eyes, but with his soul. And what he saw was terrifying. A being older than nations, a mind vast and cruel and beautiful, a goddess of blood and decay, and yet beneath it all, a wound, a sorrow, something endless and yearning. And Seraphina kissed him. It was no gentle thing. Her mouth devoured his, fangs grazing his lip. She bit him, deep, sudden, electric, and drank from the corner of his mouth as he moaned against her. The kiss was domination, seduction, coronation. When she pulled back, her eyes burned like two dying stars. "You are not mine," she said, "not yet, but you are no longer theirs." She stood and walked away, the blade vanishing into the air. "You are marked, Andrei. The first taste is always the sweetest. Now you must choose, become, or be consumed." He collapsed to the floor, shaking, blood on his lips, fire in his veins. The blade had cut his soul, and the kiss had lit it aflame. Chapter 10. The Price of Forever. Lahmian burned. The once great city of alabaster towers and crimson courtyards, where golden fountains once flowed with scented water, now belched black smoke into a starless sky. Screams echoed through the winding streets, not of war, but of retribution. Buildings crumbled beneath the wrath of men and gods, and the air reeked of ash, flesh, and betrayal. Seraphina was not yet a name whispered with reverence or fear. She was Seta, the 17th daughter of a mid-tier Lahmian noble, barely 3 decades into undeath. Her beauty was only beginning to bloom into its monstrous perfection, and her mastery over blood was still clumsy, born of lust more than craft. She had believed in Neferata. She had worshipped her like a divine flame, first queen, eternal monarch, matron of the thirst. But when the towers fell and the temples cracked, Neferata fled into legend, leaving her daughters behind to burn. Seta did not weep. She fed. The streets were rivers of blood. Mortals and undead alike were butchered in their homes, staked in the squares, dragged into sunlight, and roasted alive in their finery. Vampires fell by the hundreds, betrayed by servants, lovers, even their own kin. She remembered the sight of her elder sister's head on a pike, her mouth still whispering spells as flames devoured her body. Seta did not scream. She ran. Through the catacombs beneath the city, where ancient blood pooled in forgotten bowls, and walls were lined with bones dressed in silk. She carved through guards, tore open priests, and slaughtered her way free with bare hands and bared fangs. Her gown was soaked in blood by the time she reached the desert. Not hers. She ran until the golden sands turned gray, until the sun burned her skin to blistered leather, until her feet bled through their slippers. And then she found the jackals. They smelled her weakness and circled like shadows on 4 legs, drawn by the scent of her wounds. She let them come, and when they pounced, she unleashed herself. The desert knew her then, not as a fleeing girl, but as a predator. The sand drank their blood and crunched beneath her teeth as she devoured them raw, howling with pain and triumph beneath the moon. From the ruins of Lahmian to the border of Araby she wandered, changing her name with every town, every corpse she left cold in the night. She fed on bandits, lovers, lords. She learned how to charm, how to enthrall, how to break men with nothing but a glance and a whisper. By the time she reached the border princes, Seda was gone. Seraphina Velmyra had been born. She arrived at the gates of a crumbling estate belonging to a widowed noble, Lord Seraphina Velmyra, old, rich, and so heartbreakingly lonely. She posed as a distant relative, her identity carefully crafted with forged documents, false jewels, and the sweet poison of her voice. Her skin was flawless again, restored by the blood of a caravan full of slaves she'd drained dry along the way. Her voice could soften steel. Her gaze could wilt a man's soul. She smiled. He welcomed her in. Within weeks, he loved her. Within months, he was dead. Seraphina wept over his casket, wailing in perfect grief, draped in mourning silks like a widow sculpted from sorrow. The local lords offered condolences. The servants bowed deeper. The estate passed to her, uncontested, undoubted. She began to build a new court, hidden beneath silks and banquets and perfumes. She surrounded herself with carefully chosen mortals, beautiful, broken things that would do as they were told. She found others like her, remnants of Lahmian who had survived in shadow. She gave them purpose, power, blood. She gave them Velmyra, but it came at a cost. Seraphina learned the true price of forever. She learned it every time she looked into a mirror and saw nothing. She learned it when she had to erase the minds of children who saw too much. When she had to cut the throat of her favorite maid, the one who used to braid her hair, because the girl had found a locked journal and opened it. When she kissed a mortal who truly loved her and had to bleed him dry because her hunger knew no mercy. She learned it as the centuries passed, and her heart withered into crimson crystal. Immortality was not a blessing. It was a crown of glass, forged in fire and regret. But she bore it with grace, because to be forgotten was the true death. And Seraphina Velmyra would never be forgotten. Not again. Chapter 11. The Inquisitors' Arrival. The first sign of his coming was the crows, hundreds of them, blotting the sky, wheeling above Velmyra Keep in silent fury. They did not call, they did not land. They circled like omens, their black wings stretched across the bleak afternoon sky like a funeral shroud. The second sign was the smell of burning flesh. It drifted in from the edge of the village, curling on the wind like a serpent. Farmers paused mid-harvest, noses wrinkling. Children stopped playing and stared at the forest. Dogs whined and hid beneath carts. The earth itself seemed to tense. Then the bells rang. A single rider passed through the village gates, clad in a duster of sun-bleached leather and wide-brimmed hat adorned with a ragged feather blackened by soot. He wore no sigils of office, no house colors, no heraldry. But none were needed. His name was Inquisitor Thane Albrecht, servant of Sigmar, sanctioned by the Order of the Silver Flame. He rode a war-horse draped in chains and steel plating, its eyes yellow with perpetual rage. On his back was a sword nearly as long as he was tall, etched in runes of binding and blessed under twin moons. Across his chest were pistols of dwarfen make and vials of holy water secured in iron loops. And, hanging from his saddle, a severed head, burned, jawless, its eyes melted into the skull, the remains of Father Eland Morbrecht. Pinned to the dead priest's robes was a message scrawled in blood. "They're already here." Albrecht made no speeches. He did not meet the mayor. He set up camp in the chapel of Moor, surrounded by glyphs carved in ash and bone. His guards, silent fanatics with burned faces and shaved heads, fanned out into the village, dragging out suspects in the dead of night. The first was a midwife, accused of unholy birthings. She was tied to a stake and burned within an hour. The second, a shepherd, hanged with his entrails stuffed into his mouth, accused of feeding his flock the flesh of buried kin. The third was only a child, 12. She had nightmares. She screamed Seraphina's name in her sleep. He slit her throat in the town square before sunrise. Albrecht moved like a storm in boots. Each dawn brought more bodies. Andrei watched from Velmyra's highest tower, his eyes narrowed, body half tingling with the hunger that now lived within him. He could feel it, the purity that radiated from the Inquisitor like a fire meant to sear flesh from bone. It made his teeth ache. Seraphina, meanwhile, stood at her balcony in a sheer black gown, watching with a calm that made the servants uneasy. "He is close," she said. "Too close." Andrei stood behind her, arms folded tightly. "He has the priest's head." "It was always going to come," she replied. "Moor's dogs never let a scent die quietly." "What should we do?" Her eyes glimmered. "Let him come. We will teach him the price of looking into the dark." That night, Albrecht entered the Velmyra crypts without invitation. 6 of his men flanked him, armed with torches and purity seals, chanting under their breath. They poured blessed oil along the stone corridors, nailing holy writ to the walls. The sarcophagi did not stir. The altar of blood remained still. But then he came to the hidden passage, the one behind the false tomb, the one even Andrei had feared to revisit. He forced the door open with a relic blade and descended into the chamber beneath, where shadows writhed like worms and the walls wept blood. There he found the bodies. Dozens, hundreds. Dried, mummified, drained husks, children, nobles, peasants, their skin crumpled like paper, their mouths frozen mid-scream. In the far corner, a basin overflowed with still warm blood, as if the room had just been fed. Albrecht's men vomited or collapsed. He prayed, and the room screamed. The walls quaked. The blood in the basin boiled. The sarcophagi groaned, chains rattling. Something beneath the floor began to knock. He raised his sword, shouting, rites of binding, glyphs glowing on his armor. His men poured salt and ash, chanting louder, louder. Then the floor split. From the chasm emerged a hand, long-fingered, taloned, bone-white and glistening with viscera. Albrecht bellowed and brought his blade down, severing the hand. The crypt shrieked. He turned and fled, dragging the disoriented guards behind him. They sealed the crypt with silver, with prayer, with fire. But something laughed behind the stones. Something old. The next morning, Thane Albrecht stood before the gates of Velmyra Keep. He pounded his gauntlet against the iron doors. "Lady Seraphina Velmyra," he called, voice like thunder, "in the name of Sigmar. Neharan blood is upon your hands. Your crimes are known. You are summoned for judgment." The doors opened. Seraphina stepped out, draped in mourning black, smiling faintly. "I welcome you, Inquisitor," she said sweetly. "We have so much to discuss." Chapter 12. Fire Beneath Velvet. The scent of perfume and scorched flesh coiled in the halls of Velmyra Keep like a seductive miasma. It clung to the velvet drapes, seeped into the stone, and lingered in the hair of every servant who dared walk the corridors. The fires of suspicion lit by Inquisitor Thane Albrecht had begun to spread, crackling at the edges of Seraphina's carefully woven dominion. But Lady Seraphina Velmyra was not afraid. She was busy. In the ballroom, once used for masquerades and courtly seductions, she stood before a table ringed with high-backed chairs, each one occupied by a face of the local nobility, greedy barons, reclusive march lords, merchant matriarchs who wore powder overwrought. These were not friends. They were assets, and assets required tending. "My friends," Seraphina said, voice a lullaby soaked in fine wine, "you've heard the lies, whispers of corruption, of curses, of unnatural longevity." Her lips curled into a wounded smile. "I grieve to know how deep jealousy cuts, when it cannot share in beauty's blessings." Laughter, thin, strained, but real enough. Most were enthralled, her charm woven into every syllable, every flick of her wrist, but not all. Baroness Rusina of Drehol did not smile. Her gaze was narrow, fingers twitching beneath her lace gloves. She was too clever. She'd noticed the way the servants never left the estate, how her niece had vanished after last year's equinox ball. She would need to be dealt with. Later, downstairs, in the servants' wing, Alta Maria fed on the scullery maid. She did it gently, lovingly, holding the girl like a mother might cradle a fevered child, stroking her hair as she drank. The maid moaned, dazed and dying, eyes rolling back, pulse fluttering like a snared bird. When she was nearly empty, Maria bit her own wrist and dripped a single drop of viti into the girl's mouth. Revival, control. When the girl's eyes opened again, they were glassy, no longer hers. "Tell no one," Mireille cooed, patting her cheek. "And go clean the chapel floors, bleach them, burn the linens. There must be no trace." The girl nodded and stumbled off, her blood still on Mireille's lips. In the crypts, Seraphina's coven gathered. They were agitated. "The Inquisitor knows," hissed Brelka, her face half obscured by a bone mask. "He breached the altar chamber. He sealed it with holy silver. My children claw at the stone and it burns." "We can't keep feeding at this rate," said Virel, snapping her blackened fingernails. "The stock is drying out. The village suspects. Even the graveyard reeks of him." Nizaria tilted her blindfolded head. "He's driven by prophecy. I saw it in the stars last night. His fate is woven with ash." Seraphina raised her hand. Silence fell like a guillotine. "He is dangerous," she said, "but danger can be repurposed." Her voice dropped, colder now. "We turn the village against him, let them see him for what he is, a butcher, a fanatic. We spread rumors, we burn farms, we leave no evidence but his mark. They will fear him, hate him, distrust him." "And if they don't?" Virel asked. Seraphina's smile was all teeth. "Then we burn them instead." That night, fires lit the horizon. 3 homes at the village edge were reduced to black skeletons. The family within one, father, mother, 2 daughters, were found nailed to their doors, mouths sewn shut with thorn wire. On each corpse was branded the sigil of the silver flame. Albrecht was blamed. The townsfolk rioted, dragging his men from their tents, beating them with rocks and hoes, drowning them in pig troughs. Only the Inquisitor himself escaped, bloodied but breathing. But the rage had been seated. Seraphina watched it unfold from her tower balcony, a goblet of still warm blood in her hand. The wind whipped her hair like a banner of night, and below her the village blazed. Andrei stood behind her, the mark on his chest still throbbing from the blade. "You orchestrated this?" he asked, his voice flat, shaken. "No," she said. "I simply redirected it." You kill children? So do plagues. So do kings. So does time. And yet here you are, still standing, still mine. He turned away, but didn't leave. He couldn't. She stepped closer, pressing her body against his back, her breath cold on his neck. This is how we survive, Andre, not with fangs alone, but with fire beneath velvet, with lies and love, with whispers that burn cities. Her hand rested on his chest, over the wound that still hadn't closed. Now come, there is more to burn. And below them the flames rose higher. Chapter 13. The Scarlet Tapestry. At first it was a mistake. A reflex. A moment where fear outran thought, where the old instincts of survival drowned reason. Andre had followed the merchant too far into the woods. The man had been asking questions about the burned homes, about the missing children, about Lady Seraphina. He'd stopped by the village square, speaking softly to the blacksmith, the baker's wife, and a traveling friar. He said he was a cousin of one of the families that had vanished, that he would not leave without answers. Seraphina told Andre to handle it quietly. He obeyed. He waited until dusk and followed the man through the trees, cloaked in fog. When the merchant turned, startled, Andre acted before thinking. His dagger flashed in the gloom, burying itself in the man's side. Once. Twice. Deal with it. He didn't scream. His eyes did. Andre stood over him, panting, blood cooling on his hands, dripping from the hilt. The man gurgled, gasped, twitched. It was supposed to end there. But Andre didn't leave. Something gripped him, something that pulsed beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. His veins felt molten, his mouth dry. The scent of blood, rich and metallic, called to him like a lover's breath. He crouched. And he drank. Only a taste, but enough. When he returned to the keep, Seraphina met him at the gates. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her eyes sparkled like garnets in firelight. And she kissed him, long and deep, her lips sticky with anticipation. "You've woven your first thread," she whispered. "The tapestry begins." It didn't stop at one. Andre was sent again, and again. A priest who spoke too boldly of sin, a woodsman who threatened to take his family and flee the region, a maid who had remembered too much of what happened in the West Wing during the harvest moon. They disappeared, or were found torn open in ditches, throats open so wide it looked like their heads were hinged at the neck. Andre killed them all. Sometimes cleanly, sometimes not. He was careful, surgical, and he didn't realize what he was doing until it was too late. Each time he returned to Seraphina, he felt lighter, as though he was shedding his mortal skin flake by flake. The taste of blood no longer horrified him, it sustained him. His dreams grew more vivid. He could hear heartbeats through walls. He could see in near total darkness. He could smell fear before a word was spoken. Seraphina never said the words, but he knew. Every life he took fed her. Each drop of blood spilled from his hands returned to her, enriching the soil of her cursed soul, tethering him tighter. She watched him from her throne of shadows, her smile indulgent, adoring, triumphant. He was becoming hers, completely, but the village was watching too. The townsfolk stopped gathering in the market. Doors remained barred, even in daylight. Fathers carried hatchets to bed. Children whispered of the man with the shadowed eyes and the dagger that glowed red beneath the moon. 3 villagers tried to flee south. Their corpses were nailed to the gates by dawn, flayed to the waist, their skin peeled and stretched across the walls like tapestries. Someone had written on their hides, in blood, "The lady is merciful, we are not." Fear festered into desperation. Buyers no longer kept the night at bay. They saw things, shapes in the fog, pale women drifting between trees, crows with human teeth, blood pouring from wells. They whispered of the Velmyra curse, of the steward who smiled with red-stained teeth, of Lady Seraphina who never aged and never wept, who still wore the same dress 50 years ago when their grandfather first saw her at the equinox ball. A revolt simmered beneath the skin of the hamlet, boiling, waiting. The baker's son sharpened a stolen blade. The blacksmith kept his forge burning through the night, not for horseshoes but for weapons. And yet the killings continued. Each body was a new stitch, each blood trail a thread. And above it all, draped across the invisible loom of death, Seraphina sat, smiling. The scarlet tapestry grew longer. Andre didn't see it at first, but he was becoming the needle, sewing a masterpiece of murder for a queen who fed not just on blood, but on fear. Chapter 14. The Witch Hunter's Trap. She was beautiful, of course she was. They always were. Inquisitor Thane Albrecht knew monsters preferred the taste of elegance, so he had chosen his bait carefully. Lady Celine Marbrand, a porcelain-skinned noble from the western provinces, recently orphaned and known to travel under sparse guard. Her eyes were ocean blue, her demeanor quiet and obedient, her lips painted in subtle crimson. But Selin was no innocent. She was Albrecht's blade, trained by the Templars of Verena, schooled in poisons and seductions, and sworn to root out corruption wherever it festered. Her veins ran with tinctures to mask the scent of her blood. Her perfume was laced with powdered garlic, faint and pleasant, but potent enough to sting a vampire's senses. She wore a morning gown tailored to catch the eye, silk stitched with rose motifs, and a bodice that bared the throat with practiced innocence. Around her neck hung a golden locket containing a relic fragment from the cloister of Blessed Dawn, a piece of bone taken from a martyr who had bled sunlight. Selin's carriage broke down, accidentally, just a few miles from Velmyra's gates. Her guards, mere illusionists in Templar robes, vanished into the woods with hidden crossbows and mirrored blades. Albrecht watched from a ridge above, glass monocle fixed to his eye, every movement of the bait unfolding in perfect orchestration. She wept where the villagers could see her. She begged shelter from passing farmers. She whispered again and again that she sought audience with Lady Seraphina. And it worked. That evening, the carriage of House Velmyra glided into the hamlet on wheels that never creaked, pulled by black steeds whose hooves never splashed the mud. The driver's face was hidden, his eyes like old coins. The door opened. Seraphina stepped out. She did not walk. She glided, wrapped in a gown of velvet so dark it drank the torchlight. Her hair was bound in an ancient style, her lips blood-red, her skin flawless under the pall of twilight. She moved with such grace that even the children stopped crying. Selene bowed, perfect in her fragility. "My Lady Velmyra," she said, voice trembling just enough. "Your reputation precedes you." Seraphina's smile was indulgent. "And yours arrives with tragedy, a young flower uprooted too soon." "May I stay with you?" Callanan asked, raising her eyes, the shimmer of tears dancing like stars. "I have nowhere else." Seraphina's gaze lingered, deep and slow, a pause that tasted like appraisal, a silence that felt like teeth just behind a smile. Then, of course. That night, Celia was led to the guest wing, lavish, silken, with mirrors too large and candles that burned with a strange blue light. She dined alone, but was watched. She could feel it. Behind walls, beneath the floor, through the keyhole, eyes that were not eyes. The relic around her neck pulsed faintly, like a heart trying to warn her. She tightened it beneath her collar, fingers trembling, and lay on the bed with her dagger beneath the pillow. Hours passed. The room grew colder, and then the door creaked. She rose slowly. There in the candlelight Seraphina stood, barefoot, hair unbound, eyes gleaming like fresh blood. She wore a gown open down the sides, exposing the pale skin of her ribs. Her presence filled the chamber like a fog. "You did not scream," she said. "I don't frighten easily," Celine whispered. Seraphina stepped closer. "You smell curious. Not like prey, not like predator either. More like something pretending." Selin lowered her gaze. "I only pretend to be strong." Seraphina laughed, low and velvety. "Oh, little bird, your heart races like a drum, but not from fear." She reached forward, brushing Selin's hair behind her ear. Her fingers lingered. Then her hand dropped to Selin's chest, resting just above the relic. She froze. Her eyes narrowed. "What is this?" Selin struck. A burst of blinding light erupted from the locket, casting holy fire in every direction. Seraphina screamed, staggering back as smoke rose from her palms, her arms blistering, her gown hissing with unseen flames. "Now!" Selin cried. The walls burst open. Ulfric and his Templars stormed the chamber, crossbows raised, silver bolts launched through the air. One struck Seraphina in the shoulder, another in the thigh. She twisted unnaturally, her spine arching like a bow, mouth gaping wide, too wide, revealing rows of teeth beneath the mask of lips. She moved faster than thought, flinging a guard across the room, shattering his spine against a column. Another she tore in half at the waist, spraying blood across the curtains. Ulfric shouted rites, sword drawn, glowing with white fire. Selin lunged with her dagger, aimed for Seraphina's heart. Seraphina caught her wrist, held her. Their eyes locked, and in that heartbeat, Celia saw her. Not just the monster, but the sorrow, the centuries of hunger and grief, the elegance born of ruin, the unholy beauty forged in betrayal. Then Seraphina threw her through a mirror, shattering it to dust. She staggered, wounded, burning, hissing in fury. Albrecht advanced, blade raised. "Witch," he spat. Seraphina's lip curled, blood trailing down her chin. "Dog." Then she vanished in a swirl of crows, of mist, of shadows shrieking through the glass. Only silence remained. Only blood. Only the scent of velvet and fire. Chapter 15. Blood Moon Reverie. The sky was a curtain of black velvet, pinpricked with dying stars. The moon, swollen and bruised, hung low in the heavens, its pale sheen slowly devoured by the encroaching shadow of the earth. It was the eclipse of Yintaros, a celestial event that occurred once every 400 years, when Morsleeb's madness aligned with Mansleeb's decay. To the common folk, it was an omen. To the Lahmian coven of Velmyra, it was a gateway. Seraphina stood at the center of a glade ringed in dead trees, their bark split and bleeding sap like old wounds reopened. Around her, 7 pillars of bone and obsidian jutted from the soil, each etched in ancient Nechacharian script, each capped with a skull soaked in clotted blood. The wind had died hours ago. No crickets sang. The world waited. Her sisters surrounded her. Altamarea, Varel, Brelka, Nazaria, and the others, cloaked in veils and hunger. Each bore offerings, carved jars filled with blood harvested from nobles and virgins alike, bound scrolls of sacrilege, and artifacts stolen from sunken crypts. Their eyes glowed faintly, some with gold, some with red, all with the promise of ruin. They wore no gowns tonight, only blood and ash smeared across naked flesh in sacred patterns. Their nails were sharpened to claws, their mouths blackened with ritual ink. They did not speak. They chanted low and rhythmic, a language of the dead and dying, a dialect no mortal tongue should form. Seraphina held the graven chalice of Aranakhet, an artifact carved from a godling's skull, its surface still warm, humming with power. In her other hand, she held a dagger, shaped like a thorn, forged in the forgotten depths beneath Lahmian's fallen palaces. Above them, the eclipse reached its peak. The moon was consumed, and in its place, a burning eye of blood looked down. Seraphina raised the chalice. "By the covenant broken, by the mother betrayed, by the thirst that binds us," she cried, her voice thunder without sound, "I claim the gift of ascension. Let my soul burn, let my flesh shed the weak, let the night accept me as its queen." The sisters howled. From the ground around them, the dead clawed upward, not as ghouls or zombies, but as spirits, bloodless and howling, tethered by chains of red light. They swirled in the air, screaming songs that made the trees shudder and crack. Seraphina plunged the dagger into her own chest, not to wound, but to unlock. Dark blood poured from the wound, thick as syrup, glowing faintly. It filled the chalice. As the last drop fell, she drank. Her body convulsed. Her spine arched, her jaw dislocated with a sickening crack, mouth stretching impossibly wide as tendrils of shadow poured from her throat. Her eyes rolled back, black tears pouring down her cheeks. Her nails lengthened into talons, her bones audibly breaking and reassembling. The ritual tore her apart and remade her. The spirit swirled faster, fusing into her body. The air howled. The sigils on the bone pillars flared red-hot. Her scream split the silence, a shriek that made blood curdle in nearby animals and curdled the milk in homes miles away. The sisters fell to their knees, overwhelmed. Seraphina rose. She was taller now, her limbs elongated, her hair a veil of living smoke, her skin no longer alabaster but shimmering obsidian streaked with crimson. Her eyes were orbs of molten blood, weeping light. Wings of shadow stretched from her back, not solid but pulsing, shaped of terror. She had become something more, something divine in its monstrosity. She floated above the altar, arms outstretched, mouth opened in a soundless exhale that turned to laughter, not cruel, but victorious. Then the earth shook. Cracks split the glade, leaking blood instead of water. A great fissure opened beneath the altar, and from it emerged a monolith, an obsidian obelisk engraved with the names of every soul Seraphina had ever claimed. It shimmered, breathed, and then sank back into the wound it tore. The eclipse began to fade. The sky returned to its dull gray. The ritual ended. Seraphina lowered slowly to the ground. Her feet touched soil, but the grass withered beneath her. Her sisters rose, heads bowed, lips trembling. She looked upon them. Her voice, now layered with echoes of countless others, whispered, "We are no longer shadows. We are the night itself." She turned her gaze southward, toward the empire, the temples, the cities, toward retribution. The blood moon had anointed her, and now the world would learn the price of letting a queen rise in silence. Chapter 16. The Shattered Masquerade. The ballroom of Velmyra Keep was alight with decadence. Candelabras burned with blue witchfire, casting a flickering glow across gilded mirrors and velvet curtains. The floor had been cleared, polished to a mirror's sheen, and strewn with crushed black roses that stained the soles of dancers in bruise-colored footprints. Music floated from ghostly instruments, strings playing themselves, drums beating to the pulse of an unseen heart. The guests wore masks carved from ivory, bone, and obsidian, each one sculpted into a grotesque smile or weeping frown. Their eyes gleamed from behind false faces, some human, some not. Laughter echoed through the vaulted halls. But underneath it all, something else hummed. A slow, relentless chant, spoken in a language not meant for the living. At the head of the masquerade, on a dais lined in black silk, stood Seraphina, resplendent in a gown of blood and shadow. She was more than she had ever been, taller, aglow with power, her transformation under the blood moon not hidden but celebrated. She raised a chalice of shimmering crimson, the blood within still warm, still weeping. "This night," she declared, her voice vibrating through glass, "we leave behind the veil of myth. Let the world know us as we are, immortal, divine, the true inheritors of night." The coven stood around her. Altamiraya, Nazaria, Virel, Brelka, their bodies robed in silk and ritual tattoos, each of them clutching goblets from which smoke rose like morning incense. They had begun the Ascension Rite, a ceremony to bond the coven in blood and soul, to tie their magic into one eternal breath. And then the wall exploded. Flames and stone showered the ballroom as the east side of the hall burst inward in a wave of holy fire and smoke. Screams erupted as guests were incinerated mid-laughter, their masks melted into their faces. A thunderclap rolled through the keep as Inquisitor Thane Albrecht stepped through the breach, sword drawn, armor blackened by soot, eyes glowing with righteous fury. "In the name of Sigmar, you die tonight," he roared, driving his blade into the nearest guest, a noble whose scream turned into a gurgle as holy steel sliced through his throat, severing it in one clean stroke. The corpse burst into flame before it hit the ground. Templars followed behind him, hurling vials of blessed oil and enchanted fire. The chandeliers crashed down in a storm of molten metal. Fire spread fast, licking the velvet, devouring tapestries, turning opulence into hell. "No!" Seraphina shrieked, her voice like 1,000 wailing violins. She raised her hands and the air twisted. A wave of shadow pulsed outward, knocking several Templars back, sending them flying through pillars that cracked and split. But it wasn't enough. Albrecht surged forward, parrying a bolt of crimson magic with his relic blade. He lunged at Virel, catching her off guard. His sword sliced through her shoulder and deep into her chest. She screamed, trying to retaliate, but the blade drank her soul as it passed, light spilling from her eyes, her body collapsing into ash before it could hit the floor. "Sister!" Maria shrieked, throwing herself at Albrecht, fangs bared. He shot her in the stomach with a bolt of silver. She didn't fall, but she slowed. "Protect the heart chamber," Seraphina shouted to the surviving coven. "We retreat, scatter, and reform. The ritual is broken." Brelka began muttering a teleportation incantation, blood pouring from her eyes as she pulled on raw magic to twist the space around the keep. Flames roared higher. Nazaria was lost in the chaos, struck by a Templar's axe and thrown from the dais. Her blindfold fell as she hit the stone, revealing eyes that bled molten gold. She whispered a curse with her last breath, and her body exploded in a spiral of knives made from bone. Guests and cultists fled in all directions, but most burned. Those touched by Seraphina's blood tried to fight, but the fire licked them apart. The ballroom ceiling cracked and collapsed, crushing dozens. Andrei found Seraphina amidst the smoke, blood dripping from her mouth, her gown aflame at the hem. She turned to him, face alight with fury and grief. "Take the remnants to the catacombs," she commanded. "We'll rise again from dust if we must." He nodded, clutching her hand. They vanished in a cloud of crows and smoke. As the last echoes of laughter died under the roar of fire, Albrecht stood amid the ruin, blade still humming with stolen life. One sister was dead, 2 more wounded, the ritual broken. But not finished. Seraphina had fled, and a war between shadow and flame had only just begun. Chapter 17. Betrayal in the Crypts. The fires above still smoldered, casting faint red flickers through the cracks of stone and mortar that laced the depths of Velmyra Keep. The once grand estate was now a charred husk of what it had been, its walls blackened, its corridors strewn with ash and shattered dreams. But beneath, where the sun had never touched, where prayers went unanswered and the dead whispered their secrets, the true heart of Seraphina's domain remained. The crypts were ancient, older than the estate, older than the border princes themselves. Their walls pulsed faintly, alive with blood magic, etched with sigils that breathed and wept. Sarcophagi loomed like silent judges, and beneath them tunnels branched into forbidden places where Seraphina's coven had once walked proudly. Now they crawled through the dark like hunted beasts. André moved through these tunnels with purpose, boots echoing on cold stone, cloak soaked in soot and sweat. He clutched a small satchel, its contents mundane to the eye, but to those who knew, they were more lethal than any sword. Purified salt, a vial of blessed oil, 3 sun runes, and a scroll sealed with the mark of Sigmar. He reached the central crypt. There, in the half-light, stood Seraphina. She was wounded, her shoulders still scorched from the witch-fire, her movements slower but no less regal. Her eyes glowed like cinders, and her gown, once elegant, hung torn and bloodied. She turned as he entered, lips curled in a weary smile. "You came back," she said, almost softly. "I never left you," he lied. She stepped closer, her hand reaching to cup his face, fingers cold and gentle. "I need you now more than ever," she whispered. "The others are scattered, the veil is thin, but you have always been constant, my shadow, my blade." André's heart beat harder. The mark on his chest, hers, throbbed. He remembered the way she had touched him, kissed him, bled into him. He remembered killing for her. But above all, he remembered the voice of Inquisitor Albrecht, whispering like steel in his ear only hours ago. "There is no redemption in her shadow, only damnation. Bring me her blood, and I will cleanse you. I will free you." André pulled her into an embrace. Her breath fluttered at his neck. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She pulled back, eyes narrowing. Too late. He slammed the sun rune into her chest. It burst in a flash of holy light, searing her skin, sending her shrieking to the floor. Smoke poured from her mouth, her fingers clawing at her chest as the mark burned into her flesh, cracking her glamour, revealing sinew and rot beneath immortal perfection. She writhed, screamed, and he threw the vial of blessed oil onto her. It ignited on impact. Flames engulfed her, and her voice, once velvet and storm, became a howl of unfiltered agony. But even as she burned, she fought. She lashed out with raw magic, striking him across the crypt. He slammed into a stone wall, ribs cracking. Blood poured from his mouth as he staggered to his feet, clutching the scroll with trembling fingers. Seraphina stood now, blazing, her flesh melting from her bones, yet held together by sheer will. Her eyes, twin pits of suffering and betrayal, fixed on him. "I gave you everything," she snarled. "I made you more. You made me a monster," he spat. He opened the scroll. The parchment ignited in white fire. Runes poured from it into the air, chains of divine script that snared Seraphina's limbs, wrapped around her burning form, dragging her backward toward the open sarcophagus that had once held one of her failed progeny. "No," she hissed, straining against the bonds. "I am eternal. He said the final word. The sarcophagus sealed. The runes fused into the stone. Silence fell. Smoke coiled in the crypt. Ash drifted from the air. André collapsed to his knees, gasping, trembling. His skin blistered from the radiant heat. His heart was heavy, broken. But it was done. He had betrayed her, and in doing so had damned himself anew. Chapter 18. Ashes of the Velvet Throne. Dawn broke bloodless over the border princes. Where once Velmyra Keep had stood proud, a bastion of quiet decadence veiled in mystery and charm, now only a blackened carcass remained. Smoke curled from the ruins like incense for a god long dead. and the scent that wafted downwind was not merely fire and ash, but the coppery stench of charred flesh and cindered silk. The velvet throne, Seraphina's high-backed seat of carved obsidian and embroidered crimson, lay cracked in half, the cushions still smoldering. The grand ballroom, where songs of old had once lulled mortal fools into her grasp, was no more than a crater choked with rubble and scorched corpses. The chapel had collapsed inward upon itself, its altar split in two by divine force, and the crypt entrance, once hidden, now exposed, reeked of holy oil and sealing magic. The people came to see it. From hamlet and township, peasants and petty nobles arrived in guarded wagons or on foot, wrapped in scarves against the acrid wind. They stared with hollow eyes and whispered prayers, unwilling to approach too close to the soot-stained stones, as if the ruin might awaken and reach for them. Among the first to arrive was Inquisitor Thane Albrecht, flanked by surviving Templars, their armor blackened, weapons drawn. His face was carved from stone, eyes rimmed with shadowed exhaustion. He said nothing, simply approached the throne room's shattered remains and placed a severed hand, charred but unmistakably feminine, atop a broken pillar. Then he turned to the gathering lords. House Velmyra is no more. The announcement rippled across the assembled. A silence descended like a blade, until finally a voice rose. Duke Morlin du Fer, gaunt and sunken-eyed, a former ally of Seraphina, now wrapped in a cloak of law and fear. In light of the Inquisition's evidence, he said, voice cracking, the court declares the House of Velmyra dissolved. All lands, titles, and assets are forfeit. Let it be known, Seraphina Velmyra is exiled, an enemy of the Empire, of Sigmar, and of all who value the sanctity of life. She is no longer noble, she is heretic. The court murmured approval, eager to wash their hands. Behind them, the old banners burned, roses with thorns curling around a crowned skull, once beautiful, now blackened into obscenity. Wind tore through the remnants, scattering ash into the crowd. André stood apart from them all. Bandaged, bruised, and bloodied, he leaned on a staff as he watched the house he had once served collapse into history. His chest ached, not from his wounds, but from the silence inside, the absence of her voice, her will. He had expected peace. What he felt instead was hollowness. Above, crows circled, not dozens, hundreds, too many. They wheeled in endless black spirals, ignoring the daylight, their caws like mocking laughter from a distant sky. Some villagers pointed, whispered. A woman clutched her child and turned away. And then the earth beneath the keep groaned. A deep sound, subterranean, ancient. The Inquisitors tensed. Weapons were raised. But nothing emerged. Only smoke, curling unnaturally from a single cracked stone near the throne. A whisper followed it, so faint only André heard it. "We are not done." He stepped back, throat dry, heart hammering. But the others moved on, satisfied. The court turned away. The nobles mounted their steeds. Documents were signed, flags planted. Velmyra was officially dead. Its lands would be seized. Its history revised. But beneath the ruin, behind the sealed crypt and the scorched throne, something still breathed. Chapter 19. Fangs in the Fog. The fog slithered across the moors like a living thing, thick, wet, and whispering. It coiled around twisted trees and sunken stones, obscuring the ruined remnants of a crumbled watchtower hidden deep within the Vale of Crows, far from any village or road. It was a place few dared tread, whispered to be haunted by spirits that drank screams and left only bones without mouths. The perfect place to be forgotten. Within the tower's hollow shell, buried beneath stone and ash and time, Seraphina Velmyra stirred. She emerged not as a queen draped in velvet, but as something burned and risen. Her flesh was torn, blackened in places from Albrecht's sanctified flames, her body still healing with slow, agonizing defiance. One eye was clouded, half of her lips scorched into a permanent sneer. Her hair had fallen out in great patches. Her voice, once a melody, was now gravel and venom. But she was alive. She had crawled from the wreckage of her crypt, dragging what was left of herself through tunnels now poisoned with holy residue. Her blood had been weakened, her body ravaged, her soul cracked but not broken. Because hate lived, and hate was enough. By the second night she was strong enough to stand. By the third she fed again, on a wounded fox, its heart feeble but sufficient. It wasn't enough to satiate, but enough to breathe. By the fifth, they began to return to her. The survivors. Alta Morea, her once beautiful face now half collapsed from the witchfire bolt, missing an eye, her limbs twisted from magic backlash, but her mind, her loyalty, intact. She knelt before Seraphina and kissed her burned foot, weeping in silence. Brelka, one arm missing, black veins creeping up her neck from cursed wounds, her tongue cut to silence a death curse that backfired. She said nothing, but the look in her eyes spoke of vengeance sung in blood. Nizaria, half mad, her blindfold long burned away, her empty sockets now sewn shut with silver thread. She had seen too much. And in her ramblings she muttered names, noble families, merchant lines, inquisitors, all targets Seraphina etched into memory. They were only 3 now. 3, from a coven once 13 strong. But Seraphina looked upon them not with sorrow, but with purpose. "We do not mourn," she rasped, voice like wind across graves. "We endure." They bowed. Night fell fully then, and the fog deepened. The ruins became invisible even to the moon. That evening, they struck their first blow. A hunting camp nearby, 5 men, 2 women, a priest of Tau. They laughed around a fire, drunk on stolen wine and tales of the fallen witch-whore of Velmyra. They didn't hear Mireia until she was upon them. She tore the priest's throat with her teeth, drank the blood as he gurgled, eyes wide and reaching. The fire flared once with holy panic and was snuffed out in a hiss of shadow as Brelka cracked the neck of one hunter, his body folding in a wet, awkward slump. Seraphina walked among them, slow, regal, savoring it. She held one woman down by the hair, dragging her across the mud, forcing her to watch as her husband was disemboweled by Nazaria's silver nails. "Do you believe in justice?" Seraphina whispered, kneeling beside the woman, stroking her face. The woman sobbed, eyes wild, face speckled in blood. Seraphina kissed her forehead, then bit into her throat with a sickening crack, draining her until her legs stopped twitching. By morning, the camp was gone. Only remnants remained, bones snapped and piled in a ring, entrails hung from the trees in ceremonial patterns, and one surviving man nailed to a tree, alive, blindfolded, with a note pinned to his chest in flayed skin. "The Queen endures." The survivors began whispering it again. Not in reverence, in fear. Across the region, livestock died in their pens, drained, their skin pale and stretched. Children dreamed of a woman with half a face and lips like knives. One lord was found dead in his keep, his blood crystallized, his heart missing. The court thought her gone. But in the shadows, in the fog, she rebuilt. Not a court of elegance, but a throne of bone. And her crown would be vengeance. Chapter 20. The Crimson Covenant, Reborn. Years passed. The ruins of Velmyra Keep faded into overgrowth and legend. Moss swallowed its blackened stones. Ivy choked the remnants of its grand arches. The wind whispered through the hollow crypt entrances like a dirge long forgotten. Locals would not tread there. Maps redrew themselves to avoid its memory. It became a scar in the land, an empty grave with no name, no tombstone. And then they came. A new noble line, seemingly birthed from nowhere, swept into the province under banners of crimson and silver, bearing the name House Velmyra. They claimed descent from distant Thailand blood, their lineage backed by forged decrees and glittering coin. They arrived not with armies, but influence, their carriages heavy with gold, their letters sealed with jewels, their tongues fluent in a dozen dialects of deception. The estate they rebuilt was not Velmyra Keep, not exactly. It stood 3 miles east of the original ruin, sculpted from black stone and white marble, its windows tall and narrow, its halls perfumed with lilac and something metallic. The architecture mirrored old Lahmian motifs, subtle curves, serpentine patterns, stained glass showing roses coiling around screaming skulls. The villagers took notice. They spoke in hushed tones of the new lady of the house, her beauty so sharp it made men dizzy, her voice like honey dipped in poison. Her name was Lady Valeska Velmyra. She held court once a week, dressed in gowns the color of congealed wine, her every movement a lesson in restraint and seduction. Her eyes were 2 deep garnets, veiled by lashes long as whispers. She dined rarely. She smiled always. Her servants never aged. Her steward, a tall man with a scar across his chest, watched over her with fanatical devotion. Trade blossomed. Crops flourished mysteriously in blighted soil. Merchants reported double profits. And nobles died. Subtly, quietly. One by one. A heart here, a suicide there. A carriage overturned in a dry creek. Families vanished overnight. Their holdings were absorbed, debts erased, assets folded into the ever-expanding reach of House Velmyra. And still none dared accuse. For Lady Valeska knew every secret before it was whispered. She danced at balls thrown in cities, 200 miles away. She was painted by 3 of the Empire's greatest artists, each of whom disappeared within the year. She sent gifts to the High Temple of Verena, wine, gold, art, and within a year the local temple was empty. The Inquisitors never returned. In the lowest chamber of the new estate, a place sealed behind stone and silence, sat a throne. It was carved from femurs and jawbones, bleached and bound in veins of silver. Upon it sat Valeska, now alone, her sisters asleep in stone beneath her. She held a goblet in her hand, the blood within fresh, swirling with flecks of gold leaf. She drank. The transformation was near complete. Her scars were gone. Her voice was music again. Her power bloomed anew beneath her skin like vines. And behind her eyes, Seraphina watched the world through another mask. She had been burned, buried, betrayed, but never broken. She remembered every scream, every kiss, every drop of blood stolen or gifted. She remembered the flames. She remembered Andre's treachery. And she remembered his eyes as he watched her be sealed away, the flicker of guilt that would haunt his soul. He was still out there, somewhere. She would find him, not in rage, but in reclamation. The cycle had turned. Velmyra had fallen. Velmyra would rise. And this time there would be no escape, no mercy, no illusion of redemption. The Crimson Covenant had returned, and its queen no longer wore velvet. She wore vengeance,